We trust the lamb, not the donkey or the elephant. And if you were to go and talk to people that you have had these relationships with and ask them, why did you pull away? How do you think they would frame it? Like, what was it in them that caused them to withdraw from Christianity, at least the expression that they originally held when you knew them?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple things would be common themes in that answer. The first is a lot of us were raised in families, we came up in the 80s and 90s. We were raised, again, in families that taught us to love Jesus and modeled Christianity, but it was also complicated. I mean, I wanted to explore in Orphaned Believers how my experience coming up in the 80s and 90s impacted not just my own experience, but also the church. But really, I think a lot of us began to poke holes at some of the things we were taught about culture wars, politics, how to vote, end times culture. I think we just began to look back and not see how that squared with the living kind of adult independent faith that we were trying to find in our 20s, So I think part of it is looking back and not understanding some of that tradition and the culture around it. And I'd say they would also say that they've seen, I would imagine a fair amount of inconsistency, celebrity, kind of the big business of church, the consumerism of church, maybe seeing people being othered or just not seeing how there's a real true modeling of love in the places where they thought they would find it. That's what I would imagine they would say. And I, on the other hand, saw that too, but I stayed. Maybe right. Because I joke that my husband and I are stupidly faithful, but we decided to press on. We just decided to press on and found something on the other side of it.
Well, I think it was Russell Moore who said that what turned off a lot of non-Christians to the faith is that they weren't even sure that the Christians believed what they said they believed.
Yeah, that's right.
Like the hypocrisy and inconsistency. And it, of course, doesn't just affect people who aren't a part of the Christian faith, even those who are inside the church and who consider themselves followers of Jesus. When you look around and see people who call themselves Christians and maybe even have leadership positions, but they are not acting consistent with the faith, at least the way you understand it. And we're all a little bit dangerous there because we're all a little bit more judgmental than we'd like to be and extend grace to ourselves quicker than we extend grace to others. But nonetheless, if you look around and see people who aren't following Christ, but claiming the name Christian, it causes you to just doubt the whole thing and wonder if any of it's true. You in the book, you unpack end times, culture wars, and consumerism as kind of areas that you address. And I don't know if we can get to all of those, but I want to start with end times. But let me say this. One thing you and I have that we don't share in common is that I didn't become a Christian until I was in college. And so I wasn't exposed to the Christian subculture, didn't grow up in a Christian home. And you were, and that's a big part of your story. And so, I just have questions about that. I think it's one of the things I appreciate about your book is I just got to read your experiences, and it helps me understand where other people are coming from who maybe share some of your background and history. But in the end times thing, you have this kind of dialogue with your dad. And I just want to say it might be the highlight of the book is your relationship with your dad. It really humanizes it, personalizes the story. But he grew up in, or he became a Christian a little bit later in life, and he has this end times obsession. Can you just talk a little bit about your relationship with your dad, what he believed, how that influenced you, when you moved away from some of those beliefs? Just kind of dive into that part with me.
Yeah, that's right. My dad is Jewish. He took one of those 23andMe tests and was so pumped to see that he's 99.9% Ashkenazi, which is more than Larry David. It was like one of the best moments of his life. He loves his Jewish identity. He grew up in a Reformed Jewish home in Indiana. Got married to my mom when he was in his late teens for probably a lot of wrong reasons. They separated. He was pretty desperate. This is the mid 70s. Started going to a Bible study on the book of Daniel at a friend's apartment in Fort Wayne, Indiana. After a few months, talks powerfully about this real radical conversion where one night he was just sitting on the floor at the apartment and felt the Holy Spirit come on him. Like he says, he talks about it in a cinematic way, right? But he said he leapt over the couch and ran to the parking lot and fell on his face. and became a Christian in that moment. My mom saw him a few months later and didn't recognize him at first. She literally said that his countenance, something had changed about his face. And so beautiful. He had a powerful conversion. My parents got remarried and had me. But the truth is that while my dad raised me to understand the love of Jesus and we went to church and he did his best to model that, I also grew up in a house that was very obsessed with premillennial dispensationalism. So next to the Bible in our house was Hal Lindsey's The Late Great Planet Earth, which was a crazy bestseller, which sold more copies than The Joy of Sex, which was like number one on the New York Times bestseller list for weeks and weeks and weeks. And there was an Orson Welles narrated TV special that millions of people saw in the late 70s or early 80s. And so End Times was ubiquitous. It was culturally catching on, thinking about Russia and the Red Scare. When I was a kid, there was just this kind of apocalyptic language. Reagan would talk about the apocalypse in a couple of speeches. And so there was a real kind of fire that caught on with the world's coming to an end. And so I would wake up and we would talk about it at dinner. We talked about the End Times, I say in the book, like a sport. I mean, it was like a football team or something. There was a real energy and excitement that my dad had about it, knowing that we'd be raptured, as he told me, before I was able to have a family or start a career. And it terrified me. It was exciting to him and it terrified me.
Hey, I'm Keith. Thanks for watching the video. If you're interested in ending tribalism like we are, we have a podcast and a book. Both are called Truth Over Tribe. You can listen to the podcast on Apple or Spotify, and you can get the book off Amazon. I hope you'll check them out.